Hi there. Can you hear us?
We can hear you.
All righty, good. Welcome everyone to live Q&A with Mark Cohen. Mark is an independent candidate running for Congressional District 3 here in the state of Nebraska. Mark plans on traveling the state to meet people face to face, but we all know that sometimes schedules don't always match up. And so we've decided to do a live so that you can interact with Mark. You can get to know him better and ask policy questions. And if this goes well, we'll make this a regular thing. So let's get started. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Melanie Knight, and I'm a member of Mark's campaign team. And here is our candidate for CD3 Nebraska, Mark Cohen. Mark, before we get started with the Q&A, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you've decided to run for Congress here in Nebraska.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for hosting, Melanie. A little bit about Mark. I grew up in a military family. Both my parents were Air Force officers. So when I finished law school, I went in the Air Force because I wanted to see the world. And they sent me to Omaha, which was not quite what I had anticipated, but turned out pretty good. I served 4 years at Offutt Air Force Base as a legal officer. For part of that time, I was sort of on loan to the Justice Department, worked as a special assistant U.S. attorney. By the time I got off active duty, I had a job lined up and friends, so I stayed in Omaha another 8 years. Practiced law in the ag crisis of the late 1980s. Moved back to Colorado for a while, had a family. Then about 7 years ago, as I was getting older, I've always loved the Sandhills, and I bought a place out here in Lemoyne on the north side of Lake McConaughey. And then COVID hit, and I just liked it out here, and the danger of catching anything was pretty remote since there's not many people here. And gradually just decided to make it my home. Started teaching karate in Ogallala, and had no plans to run for office, but have become over the past years increasingly, concerned the America that I believed in when I joined the Air Force, the values that we are supposed to embody. Became concerned that we were not on the right track, and one of my karate pals, who is a Bronze Star winner, said, "Well, if you don't like it, you should do something about it." So I thought about that, and here we are.
Thank you, Mark. So, do we have any questions from those watching our stream tonight? If not, we do have some people that submitted questions early. So, anyone? I'm going to go ahead and start with one of the questions that was entered earlier. We had asked around before the live stream. So, one of the questions is, what would be your role in Congress in relation to the president and executive board? And that came from Patty and Beatrice.
Okay. Well, hi, Patty, and hello, Beatrice. Our Constitution was designed to prevent any one person from having an extraordinary amount of power. So it was designed with checks and balances, and there's supposed to be an executive branch and a legislative branch and a judicial branch. And right now we're at a point where the legislature, in my opinion, has not exercised its function in terms of serving as checks and balances on the executive. And so my role would be to do what the founders intended, which is to represent the people of this district and support the executive when it is doing something good for this district, and oppose it when it is not. So
Thank you, Mark. Another question that we have is sent in by John of Clay Center, Nebraska. The Ogallala Aquifer underlies most of this district, and you've previously said that it is draining faster than nature can refill it. What's the appropriate federal role here, given that Nebraska has historically managed groundwater through its natural resource districts rather than Washington, D.C.?
Well, very familiar with the Ogallala Aquifer since I live on top of it, and there's a beautiful little spring-fed stream about a half a mile from here. But it is, it is being consumed faster than it's being replenished by nature. And I'm not saying the federal government should manage those resources, but I think the federal government can play a really important role because We need to know to what extent is climate change or global warming playing a role in this? How can we modify our farming practices to make better, more efficient use of the water? What can farmers do? They're going to have to, when we get to a point where the water's gone, what are the farmers and ranchers going to do to, stay alive, and how can they shift their businesses? And so this is why we have uh, the Department of Agriculture to study these things. We have something called the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So I think the federal role in that instance is largely funding research so that we can identify we know what the problem is, but we don't know fully what the cause of the problem is. We have some idea, but also what given the fact that it's not going to replenish itself overnight. It took hundreds of thousands of years to build an aquifer like that, and maybe more. And it's not something we're going to solve easily. So we're going to have federal research to figure out how we can adjust to it.
Thank you. I know water is important to our state, to many people. So, yeah, like I said, get on and ask questions. This is your chance. Let's see. I don't know if we've got one here or not. We've got hellos, but we haven't got a question yet. So
Hello.
people are being a little shy, I guess, but that's okay. Mark, you talk a lot about avoiding labels. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So one of the most dangerous words in the English language is the word is, because we say she is a Republican or he is a Democrat, and we're attempting to divide everybody into one of two boxes, and it's dividing America, and it's sort of dumbing us down. We try to make everything black and white now, and there's two sides to everybody's in one of two sides. And so when we say labels, I think that is simplistic and it's not helpful. And so if we could stop labeling each other with one word, and human beings are complex. There's no one word that defines a human being. If we could stop labeling and recognize a person you're calling a Republican is also a father, and maybe a mechanic, and maybe that person you're calling a Democrat is also a grandmother, and somebody who does gardening. If we could just stop labeling each other. And we do the same thing with issues. We try to make everything black and white, pro-choice or pro-life, even though there's within both of those camps, there's lots of diversity of opinion on those specifics. So I really think the labels are not helpful to an intelligent discussion or to us solving any real problems that we have to face.
All right, we've actually got a couple of questions now. Awesome. First one we've got is from Diana. She says, Mark, one thing I respect about you is you don't stop talking about Epstein files, and I appreciate that. Will you bring this back up once you get in, unlike the Trump admin who has not?
Well, yeah, I will. I mean, one of the things that I teach my karate students is that your voice can be a powerful weapon, and so you got to have a representative who uses that voice to focus attention where it needs to be. So I was a prosecutor, both a federal prosecutor and a local prosecutor, and I think people who engage in predatory acts towards children, regardless of their political party, should be prosecuted. And so I would certainly like to use the bully pulpit to keep the focus on that. And this administration is very good about distractions. And just when the Epstein thing was getting warmed up, the war in Iran started. So so I would continue to do what I could to speak up about it and keep the focus on that.
Thank you, Mark. I know that's an important issue to a lot of people. We have another question. This one is from the Real Red Flashlight. It says, it seems like a lot of deadlocks happen in Washington because people get hung up on just one issue, and they can't make peace well enough to move forward on any other issue. What is the solution?
Well, I think there's a couple possible solutions. So one is each time there's a new Congress and a new House of Representatives, they write their own rules for the rules that they're going to work under for that session. So one thing that really bothers me are there are hundreds of provisions included inside a single bill. And so a representative is oftentimes forced to, there might be a bill where the representative likes some things and thinks they're good for his or her district, and there's other things that are bad, and they're kind of forced to do all or nothing. And so I'd like to see rules that allow more single subject bills so representatives can, aren't stuck having to choose. The other thing I think, and it's the number of independents in America, the number of voters who identify as independent is at an all-time high, and it's because they know the two-party system isn't working. We go back to the labels thing. Each party calling the other something, and nothing ever gets done. And the party system now, it used to be there were Republicans who would vote against their party on certain issues, and Democrats who would vote against their party on certain issues, and now with all the money in politics. And all the party that the parties have, if you don't go the way your party wants you to, then you get a primary challenger. So the system is just not working. And that's one thing I really look forward to about being an independent, is just kind of being able to sidestep that game and just be a voice for the people of this district.
Thank you. Another question we have, this one is from Tom. Tom asks, if elected, what are your top priorities for Nebraska?
Okay. So top priorities for Nebraska are, I think this is top priority for America, not just for Nebraska, because the reason our system is not working is the labels, the money in politics, everything being divided into two sides. And so I think that being an independent voice and not having to answer to a party boss and not being bound by a certain ideology, I think that's the most important thing any representative can do. But specifically for Nebraska, the rural areas tend to get ignored by both parties. If you look at the so-called big beautiful bill, the people who benefited from that were largely the wealthy. And guess what? There's not that many wealthy people living in Nebraska. Maybe Warren Buffett, but they're generally living on the coast. So the money's flowing out of Nebraska towards the coast. Look at the Democratic Party, who are, their chairman, the leader in the Senate is from New York. The leader in the House is from New York. The last time the Democratic Party had a leader that wasn't from New York or California in the House was Dick Gephardt in 2003. So I think that, Nebraska needs somebody who can be a voice for Nebraska, who's not going to have to answer to a party boss on one of the coasts.
That's a perfect segue into our next question. This one is from Lynn. Lynn says, one question I hear people ask about nonpartisan or independent candidates is that they can't do anything because the House works with political parties caucusing. How would you approach this situation?
So, no representative, regardless of their party affiliation, can do anything because they have only one vote out of 435. And so what that representative can do is use his or her voice to shine a light on what goes on. I'll give you an example before I try to circle back. Take the issue of taxes. I have said, I think I'm the only candidate in America that's openly saying we need to go back to something closer to the Eisenhower tax rates, where there was high tax rates on the super rich and higher tax rates on corporations, so they would be forced to reinvest their profits rather than build mansions for their CEOs. Now, I don't think that's liberal. That's what Eisenhower did, but nobody else out there is saying it. We're not having a real discussion about big change. The Democrats will get into power and maybe they'll do a tiny tax increase, but we never have these big discussions. So I think one thing I want to do is force the parties to have a big discussion and not little discussions. In terms of working with the Congress, I think not having to answer to a party boss sort of frees me up to. There are Republicans in Congress that I obviously don't know them personally, but from what I see, I think I could work with them. And there are Democrats in Congress that I don't know personally, but I think I could work with them. But if we can just kind of stop the labeling and focus on the issues, that would be a start. And again, we're not going to solve any of these problems in one term. All we can do is at least get the discussion right, identify the right issues, and force the two major parties to deal with them instead of, fighting with each other to try to raise money.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Keep those questions coming. We appreciate hearing your voice because that's what this is all about. One of the questions that we had turned in early was, How is your race different than the Senate race between Senator Ricketts and Dan Osborne?
Oh, okay. A great question. Well, several things. First of all, that's a statewide race where the state of Nebraska includes urban population centers like Omaha and Lincoln, whereas the third district is a more rural district. The largest city is Grand Island, and I love Grand Island, but it's not, it's not Manhattan either. So it's just a more rural district. That's one major difference. Another difference is there's no Democratic candidate in the Senate race, and I do have a Democratic opponent. So this is a three-way race, and I really actually am excited about this because I think it gives the opportunities to the voter, an opportunity to the voters in the third district to say no to both parties and say we're tired of the two-party system. The two-party system is no longer working for us, and we want to send a true independent to Washington who will work for us and not answer to Mike Johnson or Hakeem Jeffries. So those are two of the big differences I see. I guess a third difference is just the money. We are really having to do a grassroots campaign because we don't have big money on either side. We also don't have an organization because we didn't run a campaign 2 years ago. So I wasn't even thinking about running for Congress 2 years ago. So there's quite a few differences.
Thank you. From Real Red Flashlight again, we have a question. How do you respond to people who say that if taxes are higher, they will just move their businesses overseas?
Well, a couple things. First of all, history proves it's not true. And businesses, we had these high marginal tax rates. I'll just call the Eisenhower kind of tax system. And that went through Kennedy and Johnson and part of Nixon. Nixon reduced income taxes a little bit. Reagan cut them more, but then Reagan actually closed some of the loopholes on corporate taxes to make up for the revenue they were losing from the tax cuts for individuals. But through all of that time, we've survived as a nation. And the truth is, we got 300 some million people in this nation with, by comparatively good disposable income. So that's a good market for any business, and they're not just going to leave and give up on that. They threaten that, but it's never happened, and I don't think it's going to happen. The other thing I would say is there are some creative things we can do with the tax code. So I've tossed, this is another thing you won't find any other politician in America saying, is I say if a corporation is going to provide services or goods to people in the United States, then they should not and they want to pay people abroad to provide those goods and services to us, then we should think about revising the tax code so they cannot deduct the wages that they pay to the overseas workers. So that is a dramatic step that nobody else is proposing that I'm aware of. But this is the kind of creative thinking that we need to bring to Washington. But so that's my answer to that.
All right, so we've got a comment again from Tom. The question was, how do we overturn Citizens United, or how does it get overturned? So how do we correct that and or fix the money that's involved in politics?
Gosh, it wasn't always this way. There was a time when the money was not so pervasive in politics. And I think I read a statistic that I'll probably get this wrong, but in 2000, the top 100 wealthiest families contributed something like $20 million to elections. And by 2000 in America, and by 2024, it was like 10 times that. So, the money is bad. And so we need to get rid of this notion that money is speech and corporations are people. The problem is that because Citizens United was, at least to the extent that these are constitutional rulings, the Congress can't just pass a law that says overturns it if it's a constitutional ruling. So the only way you can get that done is either a constitutional amendment or a new Supreme Court case that overturns the old Supreme Court. Now, there are some interesting things going on at a state level where I think there's something in Hawaii now where they're saying that we as the state, we charter corporations, so we have the right to say what corporations can and cannot do, and that'll probably make its way up to the Supreme Court eventually. Another approach that the states are doing is saying, well, we may not be able to put certain limits on corporate spending, but we can certainly put disclosure requirements on it so that there's full and complete disclosure of where the money is coming from. So those are some of the things. But to really get rid of Citizens United, you're going to have to get a new Supreme Court decision or do a constitutional amendment.
Thank you, Mark. I think I myself appreciate your honesty. Whoops, bumped my computer there. So, Mark, we've got another question from Diane. This one says, "Hi, Mark. Your platform calls for lifting the Social Security payroll tax so high that earners pay in on all their income, not just the first 176,000. How do you convince voters that this isn't just another tax?"
Well, it's a good question, actually, because right now there's a cap on the payroll tax for Social Security. So whether you and it's $176,000, so good for Diane for knowing that. So the way it works is whether you earn $176,000 or $1 billion, you pay the same payroll tax for Social Security, the same Social Security tax. So one way to make ensure the solvency of Social Security is either raise that cap or eliminate that cap. Now, how do you convince voters to do it? I get this question a lot because most voters earn less than $176,000. So you would think that it would be a no-brainer, but in reality, I think there's a certain amount of Stockholm syndrome going on where the voters, even though they're never going to be billionaires, they have this notion that we can't do that. And the truth is, a lot of the billionaires, and I'm not trying to go after all billionaires, but it's not true that they're going to move their businesses out of our country. And it's also not, and a lot of them, some of them worked hard and some of them were innovative and they deserve credit for that. But some of them also inherited their wealth and had a lot of good fortune to get them where they are. So I don't think it's unreasonable to ask them to pay a little bit more. If we're really going to be one nation under God, we need to have a tax structure that allows us to take care of the most basic needs for our people.
Thank you. From Steve, we have a question, and this is pulled from the chat. What will you do to make sure concentration camps on American soil are eliminated? And I've including the for-profit companies running these camps and their contracts with DHS.
So it's a good question. And I assume when he uses the term concentration camps, he's referring to these ICE so-called detention centers. As with so many problems in America, the first step to fixing them is fixing our election system so that the people making the decisions for us are answering to us and not to their large corporate donors that profit from their decisions. So that kind of circles back to your Citizens United question, because right now the donors of these are making donations to candidates so they get what they want. The notion of a for-profit prison is just abhorrent to me as a lawyer, and I served as a municipal judge, which is not like a big judge, but still, people should go to jail or be adjudged guilty based upon what they did and not whether it's going to put money in somebody else's pocketbook. And there needs to be judicial oversight about it. So that really bothers me. In terms of the ICE centers, concentration camps, detention centers, we've had immigration for 250 years. We survived this long without them. And so I think the person is right to say, yeah, there's a profit motive here. And really, if and every president in recent years has deported millions of people. So why do we need long-term detention centers if we're going to deport people? So it makes me worry about what's the real intent here other than just profit and slave labor. So what I would do is first thing I would do is I'd fight to cut the ICE budget back to where it was before this administration's term began. That's probably the number one thing that we can. That money could be spent on our service members, our veterans, helping rural schools. There's just so many better things that we can do with that.
Earlier in the chat, we were talking, we had a question about Citizens United, and you mentioned the Supreme Court. And so we've got a question from Roy asking, would you support increasing the Supreme Court to make it more representative of the whole population?
Um, yeah, this is an issue where my thinking has kind of changed because there was a time when I was opposed to increasing the number of justices on the court just to achieve a certain result. And my theory was what goes around comes around. And so if one side does that to achieve a certain result, sooner or later there'll be the other side will get power and they'll do the same thing. What has changed my mind is Citizens United because I think it is an existential threat to democracy. That the notion that corporations are people and money is speech. This is why we can't solve any problems because our leaders are not answerable to us. They answer to their donors. So I would support it, but just caution: increasing the number of justices doesn't necessarily make them more representative. It sort of depends on who's appointing them and who's in the Senate confirming them. I mean, you could increase the number of justices and not solve the problem. So it sort of depends on who's making the nominations, and are the senators really exercising their advise and consent power, or are they just rubber stamping a president because they're afraid of him?
Thank you, Mark. Let's switch to a question involving more about Americans and Nebraskans here. So that's concerns about them. The question from Lynn is, we're having safety issues in our food quality. Airplanes having flat tires and structural failures, as well as increasing infection rates of measles. How can the government keep citizens safe?
Okay, so you can't. There's two things, and you can't have them both. You can have good regulation that protects our safety, or you can have tax cuts for billionaires. If you're going to have tax cuts for billionaires, then there's less money to fund agencies that protect us. That's just the hard truth. I mean, we get into specifics of people. People think they pay taxes and they get nothing in return, but actually they do. They get, for example, the USDA has all sorts of programs that benefit Nebraskans, including rural schools. So, specifically, you don't solve these problems until you can't solve a problem if there's no money to work with. So I think that would be the number one thing that has to be addressed. And this administration in particular has done so much in the name of efficiency. What they've really done is cut programs, cut funding, and the result is it feels like we're living in a third world country sometimes because our agencies that are supposed to regulate us and keep us safe don't have the funds they need to do their jobs. And the people in charge of the agencies don't want those agencies to do their jobs. They were put there to prevent those agencies from doing what the law requires them to do. And that's on the senators who approved those people to office.
We've got another question. This was one of the ones that was turned in earlier, and it also talks about protecting people. The question says, Social Security and Medicare are not entitlements. What will you do to protect them? From Deb in the village of Western.
What will I do? Okay, well, she is right. They're not entitlements. And the first thing to do is, goes back to my statement about using precise language. The first thing to do is speak up when somebody calls them entitlements and call them out and say, no, that's not an entitlement. Somebody worked 40 years and paid Social Security tax and FICA and all and Medicare tax and all that stuff to earn those benefits. And so when I teach my karate students, I say, you dictate the terms of the fight. So when I hear somebody call them entitlements, you got to call them on that and say, no, they're not entitlements. They're benefits that people earned. Beyond that, we talked a little bit about the Social Security payroll tax cap. Another thing I would do is vehemently oppose any attempts to privatize Social Security. This is a big thing. They claim privatization makes things more efficient. And number one, I'm not sure efficiency should be the goal of a government office. The goal should be good customer service. And that doesn't mean we can't eliminate waste, but efficiency, just if you carry it to its logical extreme, you have 100% efficiency. That means you can provide unlimited benefits with no money, which is absurd. So there has to be some money, and there has to be people to do the work and provide the benefits. I would say the privatization, it really concerns me because it shifts the risk away from right now we as citizens have this social security. It's pretty stable. I mean, we have to deal with the funding part of it, but I'm really concerned about putting that program into the hands of Wall Street, where if things go badly, the citizens are the ones who lose the money. Wall Street makes its commissions whether the money goes up or down. So I would vehemently fight that.
Thank you. Another question, this is one of the ones that was submitted earlier. Also talking about Nebraska has a long history of military service. We have a large population of veterans. The person submitting this is Hidden Oasis, and they were asking about current people serving currently. They said, "What is your plan to improve the betterment for those who are currently serving?"
Okay. So, a couple things. The first, and you probably get tired of me saying it, is you gotta have a voice who's calling attention to the problem and who isn't afraid to call it out. Beyond, and the other thing, again, if you have only one vote out of 35, 435, you're limited. All you can do is introduce legislation or object to legislation to try to make the point, or to build coalitions to try to do it. The other thing, this is a thing where Congress, again, I would say just on the revenue side, the more tax cuts you give to the tech billionaires, the less money there is for our service members and our veterans. And right now we have a paradigm where the people making defense policy are the defense contractors who donate to political campaigns instead of people who are elected by the actual voters whose sons and daughters go to war. I would say, as a Congress person or Congress critter, to use a gender neutral term, it's my job to say we should not be putting our troops in harm's way unless there's a good reason to do so. And distracting from an investigation into child sexual assault is not a good reason to do so. So I think our Congress has abandoned its right there. There was some action on the War Powers Act recently. It was too little too late, but that is something where Congress really needs to step up. There's so many things going on to our troops. We can talk about everything from efforts to erase the contributions of women and minority service members, and to decide what kind of books can be on a military base. And it's these. They claim that they talk about the culture wars, but they're actually the ones that are sponsoring the culture war. The rest of us Americans just want to, all get along. So so much of it comes down to money. So that's where I'd have to focus.
All right, we've got some questions pertaining to healthcare. We already talked about safety, but we've got a couple questions. And so the first one is from Tom. Tom asks, do you support a Medicare for all single payer solution for healthcare?
Okay, so I got it. This goes back to my use of precision language, because Medicare for all has different meanings for different people. Some might think that means everybody would have a Medicare card like I have, and we'd all be on that one plan. Others use the term Medicare for all as more of like a synonym for universal health care of some kind. So I do think a nation that claims to be a great nation should provide some kind of health care for each of its citizens. Again, I don't know how you can claim to be one nation under God if your citizens don't have basic health care. Does that necessarily mean that people under 65 would get the exact same Medicare benefits that people who are 65 receive? Yeah, I don't know. But I think the first goal, I would support some kind of health care for everyone.
Thank you. We also have one, in your first term. This is from Diane. In your first term, how would you fight to keep rural hospitals and clinics in this district from closing?
Diane probably doesn't know this yet, but the question, maybe she does. The question is very timely because Garden County Health Services filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy today. And the chairman of Garden County Health Services is Dennis Miller from Oshkosh, and he is actually helping our campaign. So the first thing that needs to be done is the $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid that the so-called big beautiful bill included. I call it the big bag of gifts to billionaires, but we need to undo that $1 trillion of cuts to Medicaid, because these rural hospital and clinics, they're already on thin margins, and they rely really heavily on that funding. And then when a rural hospital or clinic closes, that impacts the town, and people move to where there is healthcare, and so it spirals downward. So the number one thing we need to do is undo those tax cuts to Medicaid. That's the first step. Well, I'll stop there. So.
Okay. Switching a little bit, this is more of a technology question. Sam asks, do you have a position on regulating the safety of using AI in the workplace? And then a follow-up of, will it really jeopardize jobs generally or specifically for the ag industry?
Okay. Do I have a position on, repeat the
Regulating the
question?
safety.
What's that?
On regulating the safety of using AI in the work.
Okay, regulating the safety. So that covers a lot, because when a data center is my position is there needs to be some regulation first and foremost to ensure the safety of the citizens and the adjacent landowners. And it's really interesting to me that the same people who for years talked about states' rights and local control now have power of the federal government, and all of a sudden, if a state or local government wants to impose some kind of AI regulation, the federal government punishes them. So we've switched where they used to advocate for local control, and now that they're in charge, they don't like local control. So, but I think there needs to be some regulation. I think AI has happened so fast. These data centers can go up in 18 months. It takes 5 or 10 years to build a power plant or a new transmission line. And I think that some kind of regulation to slow it down, make sure that it's environmentally safe, make sure customers, citizens are not paying the increased electrical costs for for whoever's building it, make sure that the water issue is covered. And it's not, they come in, they drill a bunch of wells to take care of the data center, and the adjacent landowners are like, well, why is my well drying up? So I think there needs to be regulation, and that goes back to if you're going to have regulations, you got to have money to fund the regulators. So my position is there's got to be some in terms of the jobs, and is AI going to take jobs? Yeah, I have concern about that. And what happens if we get to a point where unemployment in our country is 40% or 50%? That's going to cause social unrest. The other thing with AI that really concerns me is just what I call the privacy issue, or the global surveillance state. We're all very heavily dependent on the internet right now. Everything we do on the internet is tracked by Google or Amazon or Microsoft. Now we have flock cameras being put up everywhere. And now we have, that's why we have these data centers, is because of all this tracking, and they got to store the data. So I have real concerns about the privacy issue here, and think we need to take a really hard look at what privacy means to Americans.
All right, from Scottsbluff, we have, what is it that makes you an independent? And that's an independent with a capital I.
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I wasn't always an independent. I was long ago, actually, was registered as a Republican, but for most of my adult life, I was registered as a Democrat. I left the Democratic Party 4 years ago, partly because of specific issues such as guns. I mean, I got living in a rural area. I don't like people in New York City or San Francisco telling me, what I can do for my safety, but partly also because of a policy. I got tired of a party where there were so many people that they would rather be right and lose an election than give a little bit and win an election. And it frustrates the heck out of me. And you see it now where there's a big fight in the Democratic Party between sort of, one wing and another, I'll just say about it. But what it means to me to be an independent is I don't have to deal with that. I won't answer to a party boss. I won't have to worry about a primary challenger. I'll be able to do what I think is in the best interest of the people of the third district, come hell or high water, and that's really appealing to me.
All right, we've got one of our write-in questions is from Jenna in Kearney. Jenna asks, what do you think is the most important? I'm sorry. As a female college student, how are you able to represent me as you are yet another old white guy? Also, how am I going to be able to afford a house before I am 40?
Oh, thanks, Jenna. Well, I got bad news for Jenna. The In the third district of Nebraska, the next congressperson is going to be middle-aged Adrian Smith, MAGA Adrian Smith, or somewhat a white guy, or somewhat older white guy, Mark Cohen, who is not MAGA. And that's just the reality. I know you don't want to hear that, but that's just the reality. I would encourage Jenna and people who feel. I understand the frustration. The young people we have not, and this is one of the reasons I'm running. I've got 3 children. I don't like the fact that I am part of the first generation that's going to leave things worse for my kids than better. That, believe me, running, and Melanie, you know this, running for office is not easy. It is going broke and eating bad food and cortisol. There's nothing easy about it. But I'm doing it for my kids and for people like Jenna, because they deserve, the kind of world that I thought we would be able to hand to them. But when you paint all old white guys with one brush, that's no different than saying all immigrants are this or all gay people are that. There's a lot of us old white guys been fighting this battle for years, while other people, younger people, were ignoring it, saying it didn't matter or it could make no difference. And so, and plus, in this district, Jenna, is an older and whiter district than average. And so, when you use that kind of language, what you're doing is driving those older and whiter people into the hands of the MAGA party, which is the exact opposite of what I want to do. I want to get the Reagan and McCain Republicans back into the center here. But how will you be able to afford a house at the age before you're 40? Fair question. There was a time under the Eisenhower tax structure when a family that had one breadwinner could buy a house, buy a car, still have time for a vacation every year. And the transfer of wealth in this country over the 50 or 60 years since then has been going in the wrong direction. There are things we can do. This administration's answer was, well, just sign a 50-year mortgage instead of a 30-year mortgage, so you'd be a slave for 50 years to your loan. And I don't agree with that. I think that what we need is funding for programs that will enable younger people to buy homes. There are some programs out there specifically for rural areas, but you got to have the funding for it, and the funding has been going in the wrong direction. One of the problems that rural areas run into is this kind of one-size-fits-all regulation, where they have housing regulations and housing programs, but I live in Lemoyne, Nebraska. There's not even a municipality. It's Keith County, and so requiring somebody in Keith County to jump through the same hoops that somebody in suburban New Jersey has to jump through is not realistic. And I think we could hopefully eliminate some of the red tape that people have to go through to apply for these programs.
We've got time for about a couple more questions. And so I'm not seeing any in the chat right now. Please add them if you do, but I'll take one of our ones that was pre-submitted. We've got your tagline is we're smarter than they think. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that has actually come up before. But what I mean by that is is the politicians take us for granted, and they think, if we can just get them to fight with each other by calling them liberal or conservative or pro-choice or pro-life, if we can just keep them distracted on this left-right thing, they won't notice that what's really going on is the tech billionaires are making themselves richer and richer, while we have to work harder and harder for less and less. And I believe that the voters are smart enough to, if you stop using the us versus them language, and you call people out when they do it, I believe the voters are smart enough to respond to that, and I believe that I've been in Nebraska, and I believe these are good people, and I believe if you give them the opportunity to think about things intelligently without the name calling and the vitriol, that they will respond to that, and they will decide that the two-party system isn't working. Let's try sending a true independent to Washington who's going to work for us.
All right, one more. We got to make this quick, though, if you can, Mark. You're a talker like I am. So we've had it said before, Mark, you're not a real Nebraskan. Well, how would you like to answer that?
Well, I'm not. In fairness, I'm not as much of a talker as you, Melanie, but I'm not a real Nebraskan. Well, so I took a graduate course in logic at UNL many years ago. So when I hear real Nebraskan, the first thing that pops into my mind is there's an undefined term. So what does that mean? Does that mean you weren't born in Nebraska? Does that mean you haven't lived here? You've only lived here for 20 years of your life instead of 68? Does it? Maybe some people think it's where were you conceived, not where were you born? And the answer is I have no idea. Don't really want to know. Here's what I can tell you. I came to Nebraska in 1983 as an Air Force officer, served as a federal prosecutor for part of that time, lived in Omaha for 12 years. And I've always loved the Sandhills. I wrote an article about the Sandhills, published in Camping and RV magazine. I learned the hard way that you don't make a lot of money writing for magazines. I've been a Nebraska admiral for 40 years. Governor Kerry gave me that honor in 1986. My girlfriend, Sherry, is from Nebraska. Nurse Sherry from Crete, Nebraska. And she was the Nebraska State Pork Queen. So I gotta always use that for political benefit. And finally, I chose to make Nebraska my home. I could have stayed in Colorado. I like it here. I like the Sandals, and I chose to make it my home. So that's my answer. And again, I think the voters are smarter than that. Most of them don't care. They care about affordability, healthcare, the price of diesel, are their children safe? And if the best argument somebody has is I'm not a real Nebraskan, they should probably start packing their office, because they're not going to be holding that office after the election.
All righty. So we've got two more questions that came up on the feed. As I asked Mark those, I do want to plug that you can please go to markfornebraska.org /donate. That will help get Mark out and about so he can actually talk to people one-to-one in person. People appreciate that. They want their voices heard. And so if you'd like Mark to come to your community, help us get the funds, go to markfornebraska.org /donate. And so, Mark, one of the last two questions is from Tom. He asked, what would you do to break up monopolies in an agriculture and in general?
Okay. So what's really interesting to me about this is it was actually the Republican Party that recognized that in order for a capitalist system to work, there has to be competition. And this is why, more than 100 years ago, Republican Theodore Roosevelt pushed for stronger antitrust laws. And so we have the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act and the Robinson-Patman Act. Now the problem is you have the chickens and the foxes in charge of the chicken house, whatever the expression is. So the Justice Department doesn't want to enforce these antitrust laws because they're getting the people who are electing our representatives and senators are the people who don't want those laws enforced. So the first thing we got to do, again, he goes, it's all sort of tied together. We got to get control of our political system so the people that we put into office are doing what we want them to do. I think that go back. I don't want to use too much time here, but go back to 1776. You have a bunch of corn farmers in the county, and they're all charging X cents a bushel. And then one farmer says, well, I'm going to try to charge a little more than that. Well, what happens is nobody buys from that farmer because there's a bunch of other farmers they can get a lower price at. So now we don't have that kind of competition. If you want an operating system for your laptop, it's Apple or Microsoft for the most part. So we may need to take a look at our antitrust laws and update them for the information age, because without the competition, it's just a recipe for the rich getting richer and the rest of us being forced to sign, 20 pages of legalese to do anything. So I would strengthen our antitrust laws and fund the Justice Department and make sure the people in charge of it want to do the job.
Well, last question. This is also kind of a financial one. Sam asks, insurance rates have skyrocketed for both housing and auto coverage. Would you favor capping such rate increases?
Oh, um, yeah. I probably need to look at that a little bit. My concern is if you just impose an arbitrary cap without some study in it, insurance company could say, well, we don't have to offer coverage in your state. And then you have a bigger problem. So in Nebraska, at least what's causing a lot of it is weather, and it's not just drought. It's hail. I think we need to find out what's going. Why are we experiencing these hailstorms? And in addition to I had to evacuate in March because we had a 700,000 acre fire across the street. So, but I will say this about insurance: insurance, by its very nature, is um, a conflict of interest because an insurance company takes premiums from policyholders and is supposed to insure and pay them when they suffer a loss. But the way they make money is by not paying when a loss happens and keeping the premium. So I think there needs to be strict regulation. But I'm not going to say, without studying it, I'm not going to say that would, just favor a cap without knowing what the consequences of that would be.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Well, we're almost coming to a close of tonight of our live Q&A with Mark Cohen. But before we go, Mark, I do want to ask one final question. What are some ways that people can help out with your campaign for Congress here in CD3 Nebraska?
Well, thank you. I hate to say it, but money is one way, and it doesn't matter whether it's $5 or $10 or $20. Look, we're never going to get donations from corporate PACs or big interest groups. But the good news is, I don't think we need it. All Adrian Smith's money isn't going to change the price of diesel. It isn't going to change the fact that people's healthcare premiums have doubled. It isn't going to change the price of groceries. So I just need enough money that me and Solomon can get out to every town and city in this district as much as we can. So donations are great. I would also say, look, follow us on social media. Social media is free. I don't have paid social media accounts because I refuse to put money in the hands of Mark Zuckerberg or anybody else who owns a social media platform. So follow us on social media. That's free for us. Write a letter to the editor of your local paper. Go to our website, markfornebraska.org, and sign up for our newsletter. That would help a lot, because you can forward that newsletter to other people and say, "Hey, have you heard of this guy? He makes a lot of sense." So those are some of the things that people can do, and we're always looking for content creators. If you're interested in that, let us know. The sheer volume of information that we have to process is immense. So anything anybody can do to help us would really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark, for your time tonight. I want to thank everyone who joined us in this live stream tonight. Whether you asked a question or not, some great questions out there. Getting to know a little bit more about Mark Cohen in his run for Congressional District number 3 here in Nebraska. And just once again, hopefully this will become a regular thing, and look for Mark out on the roads here in Nebraska. Thanks, guys.